Gives me, by the way, my name is Adil Mistry, and I worked very closely with Keki and Aban on the program committee, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all back to the first post-lunch session. So we are ready now to start with our session over here, which is the Custodians of Zamyad, the spirit of the earth. As the world confronts the existential threat of unprecedented ecological risks and crises, this panel aims to inspire a renewed commitment for Zoroastrians to take leading roles as custodians of the earth, both through an exploration of the theology and literature of our forebears, and by highlighting the efforts of contemporary Zoroastrians to confront environmental issues. Zoroastrians have committed to an ideal of maintaining the purity of earth and its elements, succinctly enshrined in the statement, "We worship the earth which gives good gifts," from Yasna 16.6. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Aban Marka Kabraji, who currently works as a senior advisor on climate change and biodiversity to the UNDCO in the Asia Pacific and to the AIIB, and is a board member of Traffic. She served as a regional director for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Asia, and the director of the IUCN Regional Hub for Asia Oceania. With over 40 years of global experience, she led a diverse portfolio in 15 countries in the Asia and Oceania regions, where she was instrumental in bringing awareness to vital development and conservation issues such as gender, culture, and sovereignty. In 2018, she was a recipient of the Tamgai Imtiaz, Pakistan's civil award recognizing her outstanding contributions to conservation and development. Ms. Kampraji is also the co-chair of the Zoroastrian Roots Return to Roots program established in 2012. Her role involves supporting the youth leaders of the program to fundraise, plan, and implement a 10-day trip to India to foster cultural awareness for Zoroastrian youth in the diaspora. This session is sponsored by the Zoroastrian Returns to Roots program. Finally, in lieu of gifts to the panelists, the 12th World Zoroastrian Congress decided to donate a sum of money to an organization focused on protecting and nurturing the environment. With that, I hand it over to you, Aban.
Thank you, Adil. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. When Keki and Aban asked us to organize a session on Zoroastrianism and the environment, it was really quite a challenge. Where does one begin? And so I'll tell you a little bit of story as to the background of how we got to where we are today. And hopefully when you hear from the rest of the panel, you'll find it very informative, because getting to where we are was very informative for all of us as well. Keki started off by saying, we face an existential crisis. The United Nations calls it the triple planetary crisis: the crisis of climate change and its impact, the crisis of biodiversity loss, which basically means the loss of nature in all its forms, including human forms, and pollution, which pollutes nature. So if you take that as the framing part of our discussion today, where does one begin? The subject is extremely vast, it's complex, and it's fairly overwhelming for most people. So when one is challenged with the idea is, what can a Zoroastrian do? What can a person do? One really does have to think quite deeply and perhaps illustrate it by people who are actually responding to that challenge and telling you what they're doing as Zoroastrians or as people who know Zoroastrianism very well. The crisis of climate and its impact is a crisis of life on Earth. We talk about a planetary crisis, but what we're really talking about is a crisis of life, all forms of life. Our lives and every single living being on this Earth is going to be impacted by climate change. So the crisis of climate is also a crisis of what we call nature and biodiversity. Because why are we worried about climate change? The planet in and of itself will continue happily, regardless of whether there is life on it or not. It is life which is being affected by the impacts of climate change. And then how do we really make this relevant to Zoroastrians? This is a conference of Zoroastrians or Zoroastrianism. And therefore, how does it become relevant to what we're discussing today? And that's what led us to discussing what is environmentalism as it's understood in the Zoroastrian theology. And we have Dan Sheffield with us today, who's a scholar, and who basically pinned it down to what in Zoroastrianism is known as Zamyad, the spirit of the earth. And that's why we call Zoroastrians custodians of Zamyad, custodians of the spirit of the earth. In order to understand that, we really need to look at the theology and the liturgy of Zoroastrianism and understand how in the religion, Zoroastrians are considered to be custodians of that spirit and what directions they're given. And if you take that as your basis, you begin to start saying, what do I do or what can I do? And today's panel will show you some ways of how they're doing it. We have a spectrum here, and we'll show you through a fairly diverse set of people. And I'm not going to go into their CVs. You've got your program, you can read them. They're all very impressive, and I won't waste anybody's time. If you talk to them, you'll see that everything you're reading is more than borne out in the people they are. And through the spectrum of their actions, you'll understand how one can respond to the kind of crisis one is facing. So let's start from where we started, an understanding of the religion, an understanding of the liturgy, of the theology of Zoroastrianism. And for that, we're going to turn first to Dan, who formulated the title of our panel, and he's going to talk about the foundation of our faith and why nature is so important in it, and therefore why what climate change is doing and what the loss of biodiversity is about is so important to us from a very spiritual point of view. We'll then move on to Anna, who will explain how, as a Zoroastrian, who actually works in conservation and therefore protects nature, how that in many ways has inspired the work she does in a very different part of the world from where we live, and how she's bringing value to the messages of Zamyad. And then we'll go on to Rashne, who shows us how you actually restore life on Earth. And if you want to respond to the crisis, you basically do it in three ways. You understand the origins of the crisis, the science of it. You then look how best you can protect what still exists on Earth in terms of life and nature. And then you look at what has been damaged and how you restore it. And you have on our panel 3 people who embody those stages in terms of a response to climate and biodiversity. And in the science of climate and biodiversity, you will find those examples and that paradigm continuously brought forward in terms of the response. So what they represent is very much the global response as it is being demonstrated by good practice today. So these are basically understanding and addressing the climate crisis, understanding the causes. These are academics, they're scientists who are speaking to you. They speak from knowledge and experience, so listen carefully. And I think you'll find both inspiration and answers in what they tell you. Thank you. Dan?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Salom, Saidji, such a pleasure to be back here in person with so many old and new friends. Thank you, Aban, for that wonderful introduction. It's truly a pleasure to be here to speak about something which is important not only to me as a historian of the Zoroastrian tradition, as an academic, but to me as an activist and someone who is involved in politics locally here in the New York, New Jersey area. My name is Daniel Sheffield. I teach Iranian history and Zoroastrian studies at Princeton University. For those of you who aren't from here, that's just an hour away across the tunnel in New Jersey. Today's panel is entitled Custodians of Zamyad, the Spirit of the Earth, as Aban was just telling you. The name Zamyad is no doubt familiar to all of you as the name of a Yazad, a divine spirit in the Zoroastrian tradition. It's the name of a Roj in the Zoroastrian calendar, the 28th day of the month. It's one of the Hamkars, or the assistants of Spanta Almighty, the life-giving feminine divinity, Amesha Spanta, who embodies the earth. The name Zamyad is a Middle Persian rendition of the Avestan phrase Zon Hudongho, which means the earth which gives us good gifts. And we chose this title for our panel as a reminder that the Zoroastrian tradition teaches its followers that humanity is indebted to the earth, and it must proactively strive to repay this debt by protecting the earth and the natural elements that it houses as a part of the progressive renewal of the Zoroastrian tradition, a renewal which will lead, so the ancient texts tell us, to the perfect existence, the final renovation of the world as it is described in the Avesta. In the next 12 minutes or so, I would like to provide some thoughts drawn from the Zoroastrian textual tradition about how we as moderns might find inspiration to articulate a Zoroastrian environmentalist ideal. For the vast majority of their history, most Zoroastrians, historically those in Central Asia, in Iran, in India, have lived in close connection with the earth and its natural cycles. Whether part of the pastoral world of the most ancient Avestan language texts, or predominantly as farmers and merchants in later periods, such as the young girls, here we are, photographed in the carefully tended fields outside Yazd nearly 60 years ago. Our world, whether it be here amid the skyscrapers of Midtown Manhattan, or in the booming megacities of Mumbai, of Tehran, or Hong Kong, is therefore a fundamentally different one than the world of the vast majority of Zoroastrians historically. Facing the unprecedented threats of human-caused climate change, with its resultant proliferation of catastrophic wildfires, floods, erosion, and mass extinction events, what can the Zoroastrian tradition possibly teach us? First, the Zoroastrian tradition in its most ancient texts presents the relationship of the present to the remote past, indeed the creation of the cosmos itself, as a relationship of indebtedness and obligation. Humanity is connected to the natural world, understood through the metaphor of gift exchange, whereby humankind repays the gifts of the earth, which was established as one which gives us good gifts, Zam Hudongho, as you can see on the text on the slide, and ultimately those gifts given to us by Ahura Mazda himself through the act of worship, right? The Yasna itself, that central ritual of the Zoroastrian tradition, is in essence a way of repaying Ahura Mazda and giving him the tools that he needs to continue to renovate the cosmos. Christian polemicists, when they encountered the Zoroastrian tradition, saw this equation of God with the natural world that he created as idolatrous. But it is this tradition of approaching our debt to the earth as a sacred trust that should today spur us to action. Later Zoroastrian texts, such as this Middle Persian text attributed to the Sasanian sage Adurban, son of Marasband, expound on this relationship. Work the earth well, since everyone lives and is nourished through the working of Spand Armad, the earth. Do not sin against the water, the fire, the cow, the dog, the animal species, lest the road to paradise and Garodman be closed off to you. Apologies for having to turn to look at the slide here. Here, the mutual gift and counter-gift of humanity, paralleling that of Spanta Armaiti, is highlighted in the repetition of the Middle Persian word wars, right? A word meaning both mundane agrarian work, right? Work the world well, and a word which implies a miraculous action, right? The acting of Spanta Armaiti to repay humanity for working her well. Further expanding on the traditions of the Gathas and the Videvdad, Adurbad equates the path of salvation itself with care for the natural world, the water, the fire, and the good animals. The duty of mankind to repay the gifts of the earth is presented in many places as the central purpose of humanity's existence. Why did Ahura Mazda create mankind? According to the hymn, which bears the name of the spirit of the earth, the Zamyad Yasht, the creation was established in order continuously to renew existence. The Avestan text says that it is our duty to make the ahu, existence, frasha, excellent. Thus, at the end of the time, the tradition teaches us that Ahura Mazda will make the final state of existence excellent in exchange for all of humanity's actions to render our existence in this world excellent. And this term is for the final state of exchange, the final state of existence, which is Ahura Mazda's recompense to us for our good actions on this earth, is known as the frasho kirti, or the frash gird. Indeed, already in the Gathas themselves, the Gothic poet, speaking as Zarathustra, implores his community to be those who make the existence excellent, to renew the earth. For much of Zoroastrian history, the most excellent of existences was imagined to be a garden, rich in natural bounty. Indeed, it is this equation of eternal life with a garden that has ultimately given us the word paradise in the English language, derived from the old Persian word paridaisa, meaning a walled garden. Pictured on this slide is an imagining of a Zoroastrian artist of 18th century Surat, trying to depict what he believes to be the court of Ahura Mazda in paradise. As you can see, it's a beautiful scene, a court filled with water, with rich vegetation, with birds and flowing fountains, as well as musicians who render the environment most pleasing. Over the centuries, while so much of their material circumstances have changed as the Zoroastrian tradition moved from its pastoral roots on the central Eurasian steppe to the courts of the Achaemenid and Sasanian kings, to the villages of Zoroastrian minorities in Islamic Iran and in India, the emphasis on man's duty to guard the natural world was one thing which remained a constant source of religious inspiration in the face of considerable social and economic change. One of the most widely recited and read works of this more recent Zoroastrian past is the Persian language Zaratoshnome, the Book of Zarathustra, which was composed in Persian, that is modern Persian, Farsi verse, by the poet Kekaus, son of Khosrow in the 13th century. Far from the often challenging and ambiguous language of the Avestan poet, Kekaus boils down the Zoroastrianism of his time, the 13th century, into an easy to understand narrative of the life of Zarathustra. Here, Zoroastrian values are translated for a largely rural community in a series of conversations between Zarathustra and the 7 Ameshaspentas. Here, I have entrusted to you the flowing waters, O Zarathustra, both the groundwater and the surface water, both the water from wells and from the canals which flow toward your fields. All the earth and its fruits are renewed by this. Keep pollution far from the water. Don't neglect this task. Copies of the Book of Zarathustra circulated widely in the pre-modern period. Today, hundreds of these manuscripts survive, including the one pictured here, which, though it is damaged, contains some of the oldest illustrations of the prophet Zarathustra to have been carried out by a Zoroastrian artist, which allowed contemporary Zoroastrian audiences to visualize various scenes of Zarathustra's prophetic career in a contemporary medium, easily understandable to audiences in Iran and India. In the last few minutes of my presentation, I want to imagine what it might mean for us today to think about this long Zoroastrian history of acting as custodians of Zamyad, custodians of the earth, and how we might take inspiration from the Zoroastrian traditions of the past to act in the future. I should say that in this talk, I don't mean to imply that the Zoroastrian tradition of antiquity is somehow equal to modern environmentalism. The world of the Zoroastrians of the past is in so many respects different from our modern world. A modern understanding of pollution, sustainability, biodiversity, and so on is fundamentally different from that which we find in our ancient texts. But that does not mean that we cannot continue to find inspiration from the past. What I, both as a scholar and as a human being, find so inspiring about Zoroastrianism and a source of inspiration for past generations of Zoroastrian thinkers as well, is the tradition's repeated injunctions toward renewal. That is to say, Zoroastrianism is not a stagnant religion, a fossil of the ancient past, but it is a living and breathing tradition which has been interpreted and reinterpreted across generations and geographies by its followers. Zoroastrians for centuries have adapted to scientific discoveries, to new forms of knowledge. One way in which Zoroastrian thinkers of the past have justified reinterpreting religious doctrine is to have recourse to human humility. Mankind, in spite of their intelligence, cannot fully understand the cosmos as it really is. Some of you here might be familiar with the notion that comes up again and again in ancient Zoroastrian texts, that the cosmos consists both of good animals, gospand, and evil animals, chrafstar, a category which includes all sorts of creepy crawlies, insects, nasty animals, and so on. And though this is sometimes cited as evidence that ancient Zoroastrianism is somehow incompatible with environmentalism, nevertheless, Zoroastrians historically have recognized that there exist beneficial products that can be derived even from animals deemed by the tradition to be ritually polluting. In the text here, we see reference to a snake which produces both venom as well as its cure, a kind of anti-venom. A bee produces honey and is necessary for agricultural propagation, and so on. Just recently, I finished an article about the question of vaccination in Zoroastrianism, an issue that is close to all of our hearts today, one which arose as early as 1802 in the city of Bombay, when the smallpox vaccine first reached Western India. In 1805, a fatwa was given by the Surat-based priest Dastur Karshadji Darabhalana that vaccination was forbidden in Zoroastrianism because the vaccine, according to Dastur Burjarji, contained ritually polluting matter, in his view. But in refutation of these early Parsi anti-vaxxers of the beginning of the 19th century, the Bombay Parsi priest Mullah Firuz, son of Mullah Kaus, wrote a treatise for the Bombay government asserting that Ormazd had intended the good effects of the vaccine in spite of the origins of its contents, and that any polluting effects of the vaccine were nullified by preserving the bodily fire which some Zoroastrian texts assert maintains living things. It is through this kind of progressive theological reasoning that Zoroastrians in the 19th century became pioneers in the field of medicine, and ultimately that we are all able here to attend this Congress safely vaccinated as we are. I'll leave you today with a quotation from the same Book of Zarathustra that I cited earlier in my talk, calling on us as moderns to take inspiration from the traditions of the past, and with that inspiration, to renew these traditions to meet the needs of the present. As the elderly priest tells the poet of the Book of Zarathustra, quote, "A little knowledge of the tradition is useful in these difficult times. Beautify this pristine tradition with your knowledge. Renew this pure custom and rite." I see my slides haven't been advancing. Oh dear. Sorry for that. You guys are probably wondering what I'm talking about. Tech, my green button isn't working. That's quite okay though. There we go. Okay, here's my final slide. All right. Contemporary Zoroastrian environmentalism is rooted deeply in the tradition, but it need not look exactly like that of previous generations. In just a moment, we'll hear from two inspirational activists, two inspirational environmentalists, two inspirational Zoroastrians, two custodians of Zamyad Yazd. And it's truly an honor to be on this panel with them. At the present moment, everyone, every Zoroastrian among us and everyone else in the audience has the power to make a difference with regard to the environment, whether that means installing solar panels or a rain garden or a carpool program at your agyari, whether that means campaigning Zoroastrian businesses to further develop sustainability initiatives, whether that means getting involved in your local and national political parties, and NGOs, that's all up to you. Whatever you do, though, taking an action to saving the environment will be a step toward renewing the Zoroastrian tradition for the age in which we live. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you today. My name is Anahita Viragami. I also go by Anna. I'm currently a master's student at Colorado State University studying conservation biology. And today I'll be speaking a bit about my work in forest elephant research and conservation and how my roots in Zoroastrianism have played a strong role in getting me to where I am now. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So to start with a little personal anecdote. Did I hear something? All right. Hopefully that's better. All right. So one night around 3 a.m., I found myself sitting alone on a wooden observation platform deep in the rainforest of the Zonga protected areas in the Central African Republic. The platform overlooked a large natural forest clearing called Zonga Bai being a local term used to refer to natural forest clearings such as Zonga. I was there with a thermal video camera to observe and record the nighttime behaviors of forest elephants at the clearing. As I got up to pour myself another cup of coffee from the thermos, I heard what sounded like the pop of a gunshot nearby. I froze where I stood as my heart started pounding and my thoughts started racing. I was alone on the platform with no means of communication except for a small GPS device with which I could only communicate with those further away in town or those in the States. There was no way for me to communicate with anyone closer at my research camp until the morning when a tracker would come to take me back. Poaching around the clearing is rare, but does happen on occasion. So potentially being around a stranger with a gun, that made me quite nervous, understandably. So as feelings of panic began to engulf me, I found the words of Hashem Vahu and Yethau Verio floating through my head, and my mouth started slowly moving along, repeating the prayers over and over and over until I felt my anxiety begin to dissipate. So this demonstrates, even, I must admit, I'm not a Zoroastrian who often prays, but I've always found that when I need it, my roots in Zoroastrianism and this connection has always been able to ground me back in the present. While growing up, I never once questioned whether I should respect the earth. Through the teachings of my parents and those of Avesta class, this value was instilled in me and many others around me at a very young age. After all, good deeds involves cherishing and respecting the source of life that has allowed us as a species to thrive. But as I grew older, I realized that my personal application of the Zoroastrian tenet of good deeds could evolve to include my love and respect for the earth in them. I could choose a path that would allow me to engage daily with earth and its protection. Soon after this realization, I found myself stepping into the world of conservation during my senior year of undergrad, when I began working with a research group at Cornell University called the Elephant Listening Project. The Elephant Listening Project, or ELP as I will refer to them, is focused on using sound recordings from Central Africa to study and conserve populations of forest elephants. So using a field of study called bioacoustics, researchers like those at ELP can collect and explore sounds that are produced by and affect species. Using sound recordings taken in the environment of a species you are interested in, you can find and classify the sounds of the species vocalizations, for example. And using this information, you can explore questions related to that species' communication, their use and movement throughout their habitat, and how they are responding to human disturbance. One human disturbance, noise pollution, can be measured directly from these sound recordings and often is to explore what impacts it is having on specific species and even entire ecosystems. To demonstrate one way that this type of pollution affects species, we're going to pause for a moment here for what I hope will be a fun activity. And for this, I'll actually need 2 volunteers from the audience. If there's anyone willing. There's 1 hand. Cool, thank you. So yeah, let's. Okay, so we're gonna start a short demonstration now. So
The Antarctic blue whale is the largest animal on the planet. The Antarctic blue whale is the largest animal on the planet.
okay, so as we see, communication can happen. Okay, so next, what I'm gonna ask everyone in the audience to do, and hopefully everyone's awake enough for this, is to start stomping and clapping and clapping. So make noise. Okay, so in that,
I have no idea what she said. I couldn't hear it.
okay, thank you both very much.
Okay.
All right, so what this demonstrates is that when there's noise pollution, which in our case was represented by our stomping and clapping, it makes it incredibly hard for individuals to communicate with one another. Since communication is a vital process for behaviors that are necessary for species survival, such as finding mates for reproduction, when it is unable to occur, like when a ship is passing nearby in a marine environment, this has dire effects on species' ability to survive. So let's actually listen to what an example of shipping noise sounds like. Or not. Could I get assistance to get this video to play? So, as we heard, that was very, very intense. So just imagine what being a marine organism in the environment is like when that sort of sound is happening overhead. So sound is also a particularly useful tool to study cryptic species or species that are hard to visually observe. Using sound is a common practice in aquatic work where visual observation of the species you are interested in is infrequent and difficult to them being underwater. In densely forested places like the forests of Central Africa, this same thing applies. Due to dense vegetation, it's hard to find and observe your species. So because of this, sound has become an invaluable tool for monitoring wildlife populations in this region. I'm going to play a quick example recording of a rainforest soundscape, which is the composition of all sounds in this environment. So as we heard, the soundscape is diverse and made up of many different types of sound from many different sources. This represents a breadth of biodiversity, meaning that protecting places like these forests is critical for ensuring biodiversity on this planet continues. Conservation groups working in this region, such as ELP, have recognized the significant role that forest elephants play in protecting these forests. Forest elephants are a separate species from African savanna elephants, who are the ones you'll often see in videos traveling across the savannas of Africa in very large family groups. Instead, forest elephants live in much smaller family groups of about 2 to 3 individuals and reside throughout the forests of West and Central Africa. In terms of their physical differences, forest elephants are much smaller in body size, have smaller ears, and straighter and denser tusks with a pinkish hue that makes them much more valuable for ivory poaching purposes. As a keystone species, or a species that has a strong impact on the support and maintenance of an ecosystem, forest elephants play 2 critical roles in the forest as architects and mega gardeners. Forest elephants have a tremendous influence on the community of tree species in the forest. This is because forest elephants are fruit eaters and seed dispersers. With their large body sizes and large home ranges, they crucially contribute to the dispersal of many tree species as they travel throughout the forest and spread their dung. An example of this can be seen here, where we see vegetation sprouting from forest elephant dung. This is really important ecological work because these seeds ultimately grow into trees, which, as we know, absorb carbon. One study even found that the carbon storage service that forest elephants provide is valued at $43 billion US. So as the effects of climate change become more drastic, protecting species like forest elephants that indirectly aid in the absorption of carbon from our atmosphere will become increasingly more imperative. In addition, forest elephants need to supplement their diet with minerals, which are found in water pits and bays, or the natural forest clearings that I mentioned earlier. At these bays, forest elephants will congregate in large numbers. I think the biggest group I ever counted was almost 180 elephants, so a lot of elephants. And they basically gather in these areas to obtain mineral water to supplement their diets. And they have shaped and maintained these bays over many generations by uprooting trees and vegetation and digging through the soil to access the underground mineral water. At some clearings, forest elephants will also dig through soil to access clay, which they ingest to help reduce the effects of toxins that are present in some of the vegetation that they eat. The formation and maintenance of these forest clearings also benefits other species who depend on them as valuable ecological resources. Some of these other species include African forest buffalo, bongo, a variety of bird species, giant forest hogs, and more. So as seen from these examples that we just covered, forest elephants play very critical roles in in maintaining the structure of these forests and supporting the species that live in them, which is why their conservation is very important to the continued existence of these forests. The forest elephants are under real threat, particularly due to high rates of poaching for ivory and habitat destruction. This has developed into a real crisis. 30,000 elephants are killed every year for their ivory, which translates to roughly 3.4 elephants being poached per hour. And I see there is a typo on that, so apologies for that. And moreover, over the last 93 years, we have lost more than 80% of the forest elephant population due to poaching. In addition, their distribution range has considerably shrunk from their historical range, as seen by the video here. Could I get assistance again, please? To address these dire conservation concerns, research groups like ELP are collecting sound recordings from several areas throughout Central Africa to monitor forest elephant populations and help conserve them. Most of my previous research has focused on studying forest elephant populations at Zongabai. Zongabai is one of the best places to study forest elephants in the world because it has long-term data available on over 5,000 individually recognized elephants that have been seen there over the last 35 years. Because we are able to identify individuals within this population, much of the research being completed at Zonga focuses on furthering our understanding of forest elephant communication and behavior, as we can take family relationships and known identities into account when trying to interpret what these behaviors and vocalizations might mean. The Zongabai research camp that I have stayed at is located in a remote part of the rainforest in the Central African Republic. While the camp has no running water or electricity beyond the car batteries and solar panels that we use to charge our research equipment, and our camp food diet is mainly constricted to pasta, rice, and beans. Working in these conditions for months on end is still definitely worth it, just for the experience of being able to study this incredible species. So I just wanted to show a few examples of what working out there looks like. So on the left, we can see one of our sleeping huts. I was lucky enough to share one with a bat for 4 months, who I named Swoop, and ate a lot of the insects. So we had a nice mutualistic relationship going on. And on the right, we see what our shower looks like, which was a bucket and a cup. And here is how many hands it takes to get an email sent out via a satellite phone in the middle of the rainforest. By pairing behavioral observations with sound recordings conducted at Zongabai, we are hoping to learn more about what this species is saying. The main elephant vocalization we are currently focused on is the rumble. Rumbles are produced when air rushes through an elephant's larynx, causing flaps to vibrate. Because elephants are so large, the sounds that they produce are at a much lower frequency than what a smaller animal would physically be able to emit. Some elephant calls are even what is called infrasonic, or are produced below 20 hertz, which is below the threshold of human hearing. Elephants are also able to use the muscles in their vocal tract to shape their calls in different ways, and might even be doing this to encode various types of information. Let's take a listen to what one rumble recorded at Zongabai sounds like. But recording elephant rumbles is not only useful for furthering our understanding of forest-elephant communication. In fact, we can use these rumbles and the many, many acoustic recording units that are used to record them to monitor elephant movement and use of their habitats, which is research that I am focused on now. Take a look at the map seen here. Each of these black dots represents one acoustic recorder, and there are 50 in total. These 50 recorders were set up in 2017 in a park called Nibali-Ndoki National Park, which is located in the Northern Republic of Congo. For the last 5 years, these recorders have been recording the sounds of the forest continuously. From these recordings and using sound detectors created with machine learning, we have been able to locate elephant calls in these sound streams. And then by mapping them to the time and at which recorder they were recorded on, we can paint a picture on how elephants are distributed throughout their habitat, as seen by the map here, where redder colors correspond to higher elephant calling densities, which we interpret as more elephants, and blue colors correspond to lower densities of calls, which we interpret as fewer elephants. But these 50 acoustic recorders are recording more than elephant calls. They are also recording the sounds of gunshots. ELP has previously looked at poaching activity in other parks, such as Korok National Park, which is located in Cameroon. Again, each black dot here represents an acoustic recorder set up somewhere in the forest. Using a gunshot detector on these sound recordings, we are able to find the gunshots, map them to a time and place, and generate a picture of how poaching activity is changing over time. What's interesting in this specific example is that we see that at the end of the week, poaching activity is at its lowest. And Friday, which is when the activity was the lowest, turned out to be the market day in the local village. So poachers would be leaving the forest to go sell their goods at the market. Being able to monitor poaching activity like this using acoustics has high conservation value, as all of this information can be provided to local anti-poaching patrols and conservation groups working in the region. Because of this, for my master's research, I am using the sounds of elephants and gunshots from the 50 acoustic recorders to monitor how elephant movement and activity are being impacted by poaching. Ultimately, I hope to be able to share detailed information on elephant and poaching activity throughout the park with local management groups and anti-poaching patrols so that they can use this information to inform their conservation decisions. Thanks for your time, and looking forward to speaking more with any of you who are interested in this later on. And now I will pass it on to Yasna.
A very good afternoon to everyone. This is my very first Congress, so I'm extremely grateful to the organizers of this Congress for having invited me here as a speaker, and to Return to Roots for having sponsored this session of ours. Dan, I think, very clearly illustrated how reverence for nature lies at the very core of Zoroastrianism. And Anna has highlighted how our interactions with the environment have an adverse impact on every other species we share this planet with. I think as a human species, our consumption patterns and our pollution levels are far beyond the carrying capacity of a single planet. And I think as we face climate change and global warming, we just have to redefine our development models. We have to realign our extractive economies. And finally, we must practice environmental sustainability. Over the next 15 minutes, I'll present to you the work I have been doing in this space for the past many years. And I hope this serves as an example for all of you to be able to take back some information so that you too, in your personal and professional lives, can practice environmental sustainability. So my journey really started off after I completed my master's and my PhD at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and I returned to India to establish the Center for Environmental Research and Education with the sole aim to promote environmental sustainability through field projects, through formal education, through public awareness campaigns, partnering with the government, with corporates, with anyone who realized it cannot be a situation of either or, environment or development. We had to walk the middle path. It had to be sustainable development. And that's how we started off. And essentially, the three main projects I'd like to talk to you about today are urban afforestation, where through this project, the aim was to start planting large native trees across cities in India to really green our concrete jungles. The second project was to promote renewable energy, where we helped charitable institutions, schools, colleges, hospitals, to start adopting solar energy. We helped them solar electrify. And finally, the third main important project was rainwater harvesting and watershed management. Because I truly believe water is going to be the next major issue facing this world. And it's not only the surface water, as Dan mentioned, it's the groundwater table that has taken millions and millions of years to develop and form, but we're just sucking it all out without pumping any water back into it. So I'd like to start with our urban afforestation project. And it was through this project, which we started in the year 2015, that my association with the Dungarwadi, the Tower of Silence in Mumbai, started. And I started working in that forest. And I'd like to show you a short film on that, and it would transport you to the forests of Dungarwadi, which initially were rather degraded. Do remember that the forest is in the center of Mumbai city, one of the most polluted, highly polluted cities in India. And so this was a forest that was suffering under a lot of stress. And I started working with initially 5 acres of land, and slowly with the support of the trustees, and we have two Parsi Panchayat trustees here, with their support, we have started slowly greening more and more areas of that forest, which cover 55 acres of land. So I'd like to show you a short film. Could we have the volume? Could When I first entered Dungarwadi, the forest was under a lot of stress and rather degraded, being situated in one of the most polluted cities of the world. I started with one small corner plot of 5 acres of land by first removing the additional termite load, reintroducing large native tree saplings, introducing a good watering system. And slowly, over the past 5 years, I've seen the forest revive. I've seen it rejuvenate itself. The forest is alive, it's vibrant. And I think this is possible only because the community came together as a whole. The Bombay Parsi Panchayat were very supportive of my initiative. Individual Parsis donated towards this project, and today the forest serves as an example of how a community can come together to start greening our concrete jungles. I truly believe that nature has an amazing ability to bounce back. If we only gave it that one opportunity. I think communities need to come together to start greening their concrete jungles, to start reviving forests. Biodiversity is required for our survival. Thank you. And the monsoon season has started in Mumbai, and actually my team is working there. I was working there just before I came here. And the minute I go back, I'll be working in the forest again. But most importantly, this is a model that other communities are now following. There are many religious tracts of land in not only Mumbai, but across India. And now the Catholic community has started off. So I think what we need to create are these models that can be emulated by others to really show them that, yes, this can happen. Because we as Zoroastrians, we are very closely connected to nature. And if you see the work that we have done over the last 5 years, we've planted over 250,000 trees across India, and not only in Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta, Bangalore, Chennai, you name it, we are planting in those cities. Thank you. And it's not only the number of trees. If you look at the amount of carbon that is also sequestered, it's so easy to plant a tree. We don't need to make excuses. And I hope if all of you can go back from this conference committing to start improving the green cover of our cities, that would be your contribution to the community. And it goes for every stream of environmental sustainability, not only urban afforestation, but renewable energy. Today, renewable energy is so readily available in the form of rooftop solar systems. And very often people have misconceptions of rooftop solar. And we're asked, will it power one light? Will it power one fan? But today, as an organization, CERE has solar electrified over 34 institutions. And as you can see, we work very closely with the Parsi Trust, and we have solar electrified Pandey School, we have solar electrified Avabai Patel School, we are solar electrifying so many more. And our latest has been a hospital, the Sanjeevani Children's Cardiac Care Hospital. The entire hospital, 80% of it is running on solar. Operation theaters, wards, rooms, all of them are running on solar. So it's absolutely possible, and it needs to be done. And again, you can see the cumulative impact. And it's not only the carbon that's saved, and it's not only the units of electricity that are saved, but look at the financial savings as well. It makes financial sense. So everybody needs to look at renewable energy as the way forward. We really do not have the time to sit and contemplate, because climate change and global warming are here. And we need to start improving our systems and processes so that we can leave a better planet for future generations to come. And rainwater harvesting and watershed management. Again, we worked with the Parsi community. We have rejuvenated wells. I have worked with the Sahara Gyari. We've done it with the Dr. Kian Sanatorium in Deolali. And again, it's so simple. It isn't rocket science to create percolation pits that just allow the rainwater to percolate into a groundwater table. It's so simple and it can be done. We've created Mumbai, Pune, and Nashik cities' largest rainwater harvesting systems. And annually, we are harvesting over 261 million liters of water. Just 3 cities that are contributing. And if we can do this across all our cities, I think that is what we need to do as Zoroastrians. And finally, my few last thoughts. Through all these years that I've been working in the field of environmental sustainability, the one common factor has been Parsi institutions. All of them are always at the very fore, wanting to solar electrify their institutions, do rainwater harvesting, plant. We have planted across Agyaris, we have planted across educational campuses, and they're always on the fore. And I think that's because of our connect with the environment and with nature. I come from a family of practicing Zoroastrians. We're not very ritualistic, but even as a child, I remember, revering, of course, the fire in the fire temple. There was a day when you revered water. There was a day when you did not eat non-vegetarian food. So somewhere that connect was there from a young age. And I think as a community, what we need to do is assume the stewardship of putting environmental sustainability forward, leading as a community, showing these models that yes, we can really combat climate change. And I don't know if I have the time, 2 minutes more, but just before coming for this Congress, I was in a very small town, Jalna. I hadn't even heard of it. I didn't even know about it. And we were invited to undertake a major watershed rejuvenation program. 2 main rivers that supply water to the city, which is in the heartland of Maharashtra, Marathwada, were running dry. And we were invited. And when I went there, we reached quite late in the evening, and we met with a few community members over there. And the minute they saw me, they were like, Parsi. And I was like, yes. And they didn't say anything. And it went on through the night where people would literally point their finger and say, are you a Parsi? Are you a Parsi? And I was like, I was quite confused. I mean, there were no Parsis in Jalna. What was this connect with them? So the next morning before the official meeting started, I spoke to one of the factory owners, an elderly gentleman who had been in Jalna for many years. And I just asked him, right through last night, people were asking me, are you a Parsi? And he sat up and he said, oh, don't you know the connection of Parsis and Jalna city? And I was like, I felt really embarrassed. I said, no, I haven't a clue. And he said, almost 135 years ago, this was during the British period, Jalna is positioned literally between Hyderabad in the north and the west of Maharashtra. So the British had set up this cantonment and battalion in Jalna to protect the Nizam of Hyderabad from the Marathas who were anti-British. So the Nizam of Hyderabad said, fine, if the British would put up a battalion in Jalna, I will provide a town to them. And the first thing that was done was to build a water reservoir. So the British actually contacted a Parsi gentleman in Surat, who was brought to Jalna to first create the biggest water reservoir. And to date, it is only that reservoir that still supplies water to the city of Jalna. And now it's dry. And so he turned around and he said, 135 years ago, the Parsis brought water to Jalna. I hope you can now save us from the drought. And that was a moment where you, as a Parsi, feel so proud that our forefathers were, so far-sighted. They were promoting environmental sustainability. They were really bringing water to these cities. And I think now our generation needs to take that forward. And if each and every one of us can start practicing sustainability, I think each and every one of us will become custodians of Zamyad. Thank you.
get a mic on? Can you hear me? Yeah, that's better. We have a session now, a few minutes for questions and answers from the audience. And since some of you have been, I can see, participating or engaging in terms of your reactions, it would be good to open this up, except we can't see you in the darkness. So maybe somebody could put the lights on, and we could then take about 10 minutes of questions. That's great. Thank you. Okay. Yes, please, the gentleman there. And just direct your question to one of the panel or myself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Behram Pistakia from Washington, D.C. I appreciate the panelists, very uplifting and taking us back to our roots. I want to share a story which connects to what we just heard from the last speaker, how each one of us can make a difference by sharing what happened where I work.
And you will have a question, right? Because this is a question and answer session.
The question is, can we do what was asked of us in terms of making a difference in the lives that each one of us can make where we live locally? And I just want to share how that happened in just 30 seconds. There was a psychiatrist across from the hospital where I work who said, the COVID-19 has created pandemic heroes. How do we acknowledge them? We can acknowledge them by planting a tree in the memory of the service that they have provided. He went to the hospital administration and they found there were 30,000 workers. And for each one of them, a tree was planted in Africa, in Madagascar and Tanzania. And this psychiatrist's dream is that if every COVID-19 frontline hero is so acknowledged, then we could make a difference by planting trees. We could make a difference by putting the next pandemic beyond us, if possible. So my question to the panelists and to every one of us is, can we come together as a Zoroastrian community to push this idea forward?
Thank you. That's very useful. And perhaps just to add that when you talk about COVID, briefly, this was touched upon by Anna in her presentation when she talked about poaching. I mean, the chance is very high likelihood is that COVID emerged from the wildlife trade, mostly the illegal wildlife trade, but possibly farmed wildlife. And that is still a problem. We could have COVID again in another form. As long as that trade continues in the unsustainable, badly managed, and in many cases illegal way, as it currently does, you would have the same kind of disaster emerging again, particularly with the way viruses can now travel and jump from wild species to human species, which is what, of course, COVID probably did. So there's a consideration, a very deep environmental consideration there as well. Gentleman there, please introduce yourself and your question. There's a mic just coming to you.
I'm from Toronto, and our Durhamere has a ravine. It's what the Greenvale area, you cannot do anything over there. It's beautiful, but you know, all the time, some tree is falling down because of age or whatever it is. And we have two opinions. One is that we should leave the fallen tree down because it will regenerate the earth as it rots. And the other people says we should take out those trees and plant trees there. What would you advise?
I'll ask Rashni to take that one. Rashni, because that's a classic forestry question.
I would say there isn't a clear answer. It depends on the site. In the case of Dungarwadi, I had to remove some of the fallen trees because of the termite load was beyond the ambient, the best level. But ideally, I would think that yes, the tree should be allowed to decay because that improves soil. And soil is another big issue. But if The tree doesn't allow you to plant others. I mean, it goes situation by situation. There isn't one clear, but certainly allow the tree to decay. That would help improve soil fertility.
Hi, is it working?
Can't hear you.
Is it working? Parveen Dinarian from San Antonio. To build on what the gentleman over there said, can we have committees set up within our Zoroastrian community that would hire experts and also volunteers? We have a lot of youth that want to go to foreign countries and also do what our Zoroastrian fellows do for their jobs. Is that possible? Is that a vision for the Zoroastrian community? Just like the Mormons pack up and take 100 youth to a third world country to plant trees? Is that something that we could do rather than just sit around and talk about it? Like the difference that was made in India, that's what I want to see as a Zoroastrian all over. I want my children to volunteer and go abroad and make a difference. I want it beyond books.
I think you'd need an institutional response to that, but in principle, why not? Anna?
Yeah, is this on? Okay. So I think that's a great question. There's actually, it's different than Zoroastrian youth across borders. It's Zoroastrian youth. Now I'm confused, but there's an organization that I actually co-chair, so I'm a little bit embarrassed right now. Zoroastrian youth without borders. Thank you. I get confused in my head, but the function of it is to actually help connect young adults with opportunities abroad to engage in international development work, environmental work, etc. There also is funding support, though it's limited. We do have a website that folks can check out online, and there's information on an application process there. So I agree that it would be great to have more institutional support, so the impact of this type of work is broadened, but it does exist currently. So I would encourage anyone who has youth that is interested in pursuing this work to reach out either to me or look online at the website.
Thank you. We have time. Yes, this gentleman at the back there.
She doesn't see. She doesn't see.
Hi, Kushru Laktawala from Southern California. So I was pretty intrigued with the issue of sustainability. So question to Rachna is, do you see any big corporations who have set up metrics for sustainability so they can improve what is going on this earth? We see it, see a lot of emphasis in US and Europe. Do you see that in India, or is it something different?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, we've been working with companies since the past 10 years, and a number of large Indian multinational companies are reporting on sustainability. Many of them report on CDP, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, integrated reporting. Certainly, there is an awareness. In India, our regulatory bodies as well, SEBI, which is the securities agency, they have their own BRSR guidelines. RBI have their own green guidelines as well. So certainly, larger companies in India are very conscious, because a lot of them have now become multinational players. I think the challenge lies with the mid-range and the small companies who really do not have a long-term vision. Some of the large companies have a carbon neutrality target by 2030, 2050. It's the smaller companies who are here to make business and profits today. They do not have that long-term planning. And I think that certainly needs to be looked at. But yes, India, we certainly are improving.
Thank you. Lady in the blue sari.
I have a message for Rachna.
Sorry. I said the lady in the blue sari first,
Oh.
and then yourself. Yeah. Sorry. There's a queue.
Thank you very much for putting this session together. It's the second time I've heard Dr. Pardiwala. She talked for the good mind, nurturing nature, a sustainable way of Zoroastrian development. What I'd like to know, Rashna, and all of you, is are you willing to put a document or a resource together that will serve two things? One is people can come to you. The second is people will be able to implement what they want because they most often have an idea in their head. So are you willing to somehow, maybe I can help you, but put together a resource that people can understand that the Zoroastrian way is also a way that is in all faiths and none, and they can reach out to you.
I think that's a great recommendation, Karishma. Absolutely. I think such a document would be most helpful. For example, my work just works on private donations. So that would be helpful. Volunteers who would like to come with the permission of the Parsi Panchayat. I think if we come together as a community, put systems in place, I think it would be much easier. And I think document would be something I would be happy to contribute
And
to.
that would also amplify the good work you've done in the Dungarwadi in Bombay, which is
Sure.
an incredible amount of work. Kudos
Thank you.
to you, Rashna.
But so much more needs to be done. It's not only the Dungarwadi in Mumbai. I know Pune has been contacting us. There are so many other Parsi lands that are lying vacant. A lot of it is getting encroached upon. It's just because resources are limited and very few people out there wanting to work on the ground. So certainly, I think if we can put this together, that would be one grand success of the 12th Zoroastrian Congress.
Yes, please, it's your turn
Hi,
now.
this is a Hi, this is a question for Ms. Pardiwala. My name is Folly Shroff, and I want to know whether you can put samplings of sandalwood trees at Dungarwadi. Is it possible?
Sandalwood, you mean?
Yes, this has been quite the topic of discussion for me. Two things. Sandalwood really doesn't grow well in extreme high rainfall regions. Survival rates are very low. So if you see sandalwood, they survive and thrive in more drier climates like Deolali. However, I've started a small experiment and we planted very few sandalwood at Dungarwadi. About 3 years ago, the saplings have survived. We'll need to see if they do thrive and grow into adults. But also with that, on the other hand, there is a slight security threat because sandalwood does get illegally. So we don't want to bring in those sort of issues into the Dungarwadi, where we grow sandalwood. We've got people coming into the forest wanting to cut it. So it's a narrow path that we need to walk. So right now, we've just planted a couple. We'll see if they do well.
Okay, I want to talk to you about, I want to make some donations to Dungarwadi. So after this meeting, we'll talk about it. All right? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sandalwood is one of the very high value forestry products that is part of the illegal wildlife trade as well. The lady there, and then I am told that we must end, fascinating as this is. So you're the last speaker.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all this presentation. My name is Dr. Zamyad from ZSBC Vancouver. Just we have to follow. It's just question to you. If all our priests and teachers say whatever Ashur Zarathustra said and whatever our ancestors in back Iran would do, what they would do in each of the birthday of every person, we are obligated to plant a tree. So if we plant that tree and follow Ashur Zarathustra's path, what a green world we would have. Also, Zarathustra in Yazd, we are the pioneer for reserving the water as Ab-Ambar. We call it Ab-Ambar, a very dry area since thousand years ago, not thousand years ago. Zarathustra people, they make Ab-Ambar and save water for whole year. So we can follow this path as our ancestor, and even today, they do it. If we follow our ancestor path. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great closing statement. Thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed the session as much as I know the panelists and I have. And we have many more days of the Congress and many more interesting sessions to come. Thank you.
Round of applause and thank you again to all our panelists over here. Thank you, Aban, Marka Kabraji, Dan Sheffield, Anna Varemi, and Dr. Rashni Pardiwala. Thank you very much.